Welcome, wanderer. Tonight, we step into the cold, into a place where mountains rise like walls, where silence has weight, and where survival becomes a battle against nature itself. This is not just a story of endurance. It is a story of will, of spirit, of people who refused to die in a place that wanted them gone. Sit close to the fire and listen.
It was October 12th, 1972. Montevideo woke beneath a pale spring sun, birds calling from rooftops, traffic rolling lazily through the streets, and a small chartered plane stood waiting on the runway, with its door wide open like a metal mouth. It was a Fairchild FH-227D, small, sturdy, practical. Inside, rows of narrow seats, the smell of leather and jet fuel, and the buzzing excitement of a rugby team whose energy could fill a stadium. The Old Christians Club, young men in their late teens and 20s. Athletic, playful, confident, friends since childhood. They carried jokes, guitars, cards, snacks, and a kind of joy only found in the hearts of people who believe that the world is theirs to explore. Some boarded with headphones on, some with scarves wrapped tight against the morning breeze, some still half asleep from the night before, some dreaming of winning their match in Chile. Fathers, brothers, cousins, students, farmers, med students. They were a family, and the plane was full of warmth, laughter, and plans for a weekend no one would ever see. The flight begins. As the wheels lifted off the ground, the boys cheered, pressing their faces against the windows to watch Montevideo shrink beneath them. The world was peaceful. The sky a soft blue, the future bright. Inside the cabin, someone strummed a guitar. Another shuffled a deck of cards. A group argued over who would win the World Cup. One boy wrote a letter to his girlfriend. Another took photos of the clouds through his tiny circular window. It felt safe, normal, free, but outside. The Andes were waiting, rising in jagged lines, cold, ancient, unkind. Mountains that had swallowed explorers, planes, and entire expeditions before. The passengers didn't know it yet, but nature had already begun to close its hand around them. The descent into the storm. As the Fairchild approached the mountain range, things began to change. The blue sky darkened, clouds thickened, the air grew rough. The rugby players barely noticed at first. They were too busy laughing at a joke, taking a photo, sharing a sip of wine. But the pilots noticed. Their instruments flickered. The altimeter danced. The airspeed needle trembled. The Andes were covered in thick, swirling clouds, like wool pulled tight across the peaks. The pilots radioed for guidance. They believed they were over the mountains, nearing Chile. They weren't. They were deep inside the heart of the most dangerous region to fly in South America, a place where peaks rose into the clouds like invisible knives. The cabin rattled. Overhead, bins creaked. The plane tilted sharply. A few passengers exchanged uneasy glances. One made the sign of the cross. Another gripped his armrest a little tighter. Still, there was trust. Planes hit turbulence all the time. No one imagined what was coming. 3:34 p.m., a moment that would split their lives into before and after. In a blinding instant of white cloud, the left wing hit a mountain. Metal shrieked. The entire cabin lurched sideways. People were thrown against each other, against the ceiling, against windows. The wing tore off in a spray of metal and snow, and people in the back were sucked into the sky. As the fuselage tore open, the tail section broke away. More passengers were ejected, their bodies swallowed by the whirling storm. The remaining cabin spun violently. The right wing ripped off next. Debris spiraled around them like shrapnel. Inside, the survivors clung to each other, hands locked, eyes wide, mouths open in terror, as the plane-turned missile hurtled down the mountain. Some screamed, some prayed, some shut their eyes tight, some whispered their families' names. Snow blasted through the open gaps in the fuselage as it slid, skidded, and ripped across the glacier like a stone skipping on ice. Finally, after nearly a kilometer of brutal descent, the fuselage slammed to a stop. Silence, just the wind. They were alive, but the world around them was gone. The first moments in the snow, the survivors opened their eyes. Snow drifted through gashes in the torn fuselage. The mountains rose around them like white walls of stone. The sky was gray, heavy, suffocating. Inside, people were crying. Some lay twisted in unnatural angles. Blood stained the snow. Broken seats lay upside down the cold bit into their skin. Instantly, the injured groaned. Those unhurt started moving, crawling, helping. They called names. They took account. 12 dead on impact, more critically injured. The teammates removed bodies from the wreck, laying them gently in the snow. They cried over them, whispered apologies, prayed, but they knew something terrifying. The sun was dropping. The temperature was falling. The fuselage was their only shelter. They dragged seat cushions to the torn opening and built a wall of luggage to block the wind. The light outside faded, and the night began creeping down the mountains. That night, they huddled together in a tight mass, every body a heater, every breath a cloud of freezing vapor. They listened to the wind howl over the fuselage like an animal circling its prey. Some drifted into restless sleep. Some couldn't stop shaking. Some whispered, "We're going to be rescued tomorrow." But deep down, they began to feel the truth. No one knew where they were, and the Andes are vast, hunger and realization. Morning brought a cruel discovery. Their entire food supply consisted of 8 chocolate bars, 1 tin of mussels, a handful of peanuts, a small jar of jam, a few sips of wine. For dozens of people, they rationed with mathematical precision. Half a square of chocolate, a teaspoon of wine, a smear of jam. It felt like nothing, but they kept going. For the first few days, they waited. They listened for engines. They prayed. Then, on the 4th day, they heard a faint sound, the hum of a rescue plane. They erupted in screams, waved pieces of metal, flashed mirrors at the sky. The plane flew overhead, circled, and flew away. It had seen nothing. Later, they found out why. Search teams believed the plane crashed in Chile. They were looking in the wrong country. And the moment hope left the sky, a heavy silence settled over the glacier. That night, someone whispered, "We will die here." And for the first time, everyone believed it. The lines crossed by survival days passed, weeks threatened. Hunger became a living thing, a beast growing inside their ribs, gnawing at them from the inside. Their bodies thinned, skin tightened over bone, their lips cracked. One morning, one of the boys whispered, "Maybe God left us food." But the food he meant was the frozen bodies lying outside in the snow, their friends, their brothers. The moral line, the cultural line, the human line stood before them like a wall. For hours they argued. Some cried violently at the thought, some refused, some prayed for another option. But there was none. The Andes held no plants, no animals, no escape. Finally, Nando Parado, half conscious, grief-stricken, spoke. "If I die, please use my body to live. That is what I would want." Others agreed. The decision felt like a sin, a betrayal, a necessity. But survival demands sacrifices the world later judges. And so, with reverence, tears, and trembling hands, they did what they had to do, not for themselves, but for each other, for their families, for the hope of seeing home again. It was the moment their story became not just tragedy, but legend. On the 16th night, the mountain struck again, a slow rumble, like distant thunder, followed by a violent explosion of snow. An avalanche hit the fuselage with the force of a falling building. The survivors inside had seconds. They screamed as snow poured in, burying them alive. Darkness, weight, cold. 8 more died that night. The remaining survivors clawed upward, digging through the snow with bleeding fingers until light finally broke through. When morning came, the fuselage had become a tomb, airless, cramped, death all around. Something broke inside them that day. They realized the Andes weren't trying to kill them. The Andes simply didn't care if they lived or died. Nando Parado, who had lain unconscious for days after the crash, began to change. The avalanche killed his sister. His mother had died earlier. He had lost everything, except one thing, the refusal to give up. Nando stood outside the fuselage, skin burned by the cold, and looked toward the jagged ridge, towering in the distance. He whispered, "On the other side, there must be life." Roberto Canessa stepped beside him, another fighter, another believer. The two men decided they would climb the Andes on foot, with no gear, no map, no ropes, just desperation and a direction. They packed supplies, a sleeping bag stitched from insulation, a few mouthfuls of frozen meat, a bottle of melted snow, courage, nothing else. Saying goodbye felt like a funeral. Their friends hugged them, some crying, some begging them to stay. Nando only said, "If we die, keep going. But if we live, we will bring help." And with that, they walked into the white void. For 3 days they climbed in thin air that burned their lungs. Snow blinded them. Wind shoved them. The mountain seemed endless. At night, they crawled together inside their single sleeping bag, shivering violently, fighting sleep. On the 3rd morning, they reached the summit. What they saw stole the breath from their bodies. Not Chile, not valleys, not green earth, just more mountains. Endless white. A frozen ocean of jagged peaks stretching to infinity. Roberto fell to his knees. "We're dead," he whispered. "There is nothing here." Nando closed his eyes. Then he stood. "No, there is always something. We keep walking." And so they did. They walked for 10 days, through storms, through knife-like winds, through hallucinations, through hunger so deep they could barely stand. Their bodies broke, their lips split. Every step felt like a knife in the lungs. But still, they walked. On the 10th day of their journey, Nando and Roberto reached something they hadn't seen in weeks. A single brown patch in the snow. A rock, or maybe a shadow. But it was real, actual earth. They followed it downward for hours until they heard it. Running water, a river, a sign of life. That night, as they rested by the riverbank, shivering under their thin bag, they saw a figure across the water. A man, a shepherd, staring at them in shock. Nando tried to speak but collapsed. Roberto stood and shouted hoarsely, "We are survivors of the airplane that crashed." The shepherd couldn't reach them immediately. The river was too deep, so he tied a pencil and paper to a rock and threw it across. Roberto scrawled, "We need help. "We have come from the plain." The shepherd nodded, eyes wide with disbelief, and disappeared into the mountains. The next morning, Nando and Roberta were awakened by the thunder of helicopter blades. The rescuers lifted the two men aboard, barely recognizing them as human. Then, Nando did something that astonished everyone. He grabbed the pilot's arm and said, "Don't take me to a hospital. Take me back first. My friends need me." And so, he guided them, his voice weak but steady, toward the fuselage. When the helicopter arrived, the remaining survivors stumbled out of the snow, crying, shouting, falling to their knees. They had waited 72 days, buried by avalanches, starved, frozen, haunted. Now, they were saved. Over the next 24 hours, all 14 survivors were rescued. Families ran to them, holding their faces, kissing their foreheads, crying until their bodies shook. News of their survival spread worldwide. Some praised them as miracles. Others criticized their necessary choices. But the survivors answered calmly, "We did what we had to do to honor the living and the dead." Today, they are living witnesses of the impossible. Men who walked through death and came back transformed. Nando Parado became a speaker, an author, a symbol of resilience. Roberto Canessa became a doctor, saving lives as others once saved his. Their story remains one of the most powerful tales of endurance ever recorded.
Thank you, Wanderer, for walking through this frozen tale with me. In the end, survival is not about strength, but about heart, about hope, and the courage to take one more step when all seems lost. More journeys wait in the dark, under starless skies, and beyond distant mountains. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and stay wandering.